because there's this other piece here that I call no freelancing. Um, and this is one of the ways that we set up a structure that can be consistent, can adapt for our bias, can evaluate candidate in against those KSAs and not candidate against candidate because like this person went first and that person went last in the process. Another way of saying no freelancing is that this is a highly structured process. This is not a typical like, all right, so Katrina and I are going to meet with a candidate. We're going to ask them the questions that we think are interesting. Like this is like a scripted process. So like from the moment they come on or even before a meeting, it's like, here's an email. Here's what's going to happen. Here are the people who are going to be on that call. Here's the first question that we're going to ask you. And then the committee has the script. So Katrina is going to say this at the very beginning. Depending on Katrina's acting abilities, she might practice it a couple times so that it feels natural. And then it's like, here's what now Tim's going to ask scenario 2. And then, Sam is going to ask scenario 3. Then it's going to go back to Katrina. And then you follow that same script throughout the entire interview for everyone at that phase. And then you reflect on it. Like, are we missing anything? Do we need to revise what we thought the next interview process was going to be like based off of the data that we got here? Not in the moment where you're like, well, that question didn't work so well for that candidate, so let's change it up for the next candidate. Well, cool, but then you're not going to get apples to apples data. And so I feel like this no freelancing or a more traditional highly structured interview process is a really key part of the process that we've heard from people who are like, if you just do one thing, use a highly structured process, and it changes the entire process.
I think we've also heard this, we sort of do it really loosely because we really want to get into a specific conversation. And so this feels pretty uncomfortable. This might be a rub place for you. If you're used to, following different threads through interviews, having a highly structured process is really takes discipline to stick to and to make note of what you're curious about, but not to use that interview time. That time with the candidates is precious. Right? It's a commitment everybody's made to show up, and we've established that these are the questions that we need to further assess that candidate. And so our going off script puts the candidate at a disadvantage because they don't get to answer in the same way that others got to answer. And so if their answers fall short, we say they fell short instead of kind of thinking about that, reframing that in a different way and saying the value of having that structured process is that all the candidates are given the same experience to respond in their way to the questions and the way the questions are asked and who's asking them. And so all of that is done very intentionally.
This is one of those things too where we talk about pausing and think about what are you trying to solve for? Quote unquote solve for when you do that loosely structured conversation. I want to see if they're a culture fit or if they can engage because we're a spirited team and we move fast and we build off of ideas. All right, so let's unpack that thing that you think is happening in the interview process, but might not actually be happening in the interview process the way you think it will. It's because it's lending itself to people who might be improvisatory or comfortable in an interview setting, which is not it is a real life scenario, but it's not there are people who are comfortable in interview settings who might be, or who are uncomfortable in interview settings who might be completely comfortable once they settle into an organization. And so it's kind of a false thing there. So what are we actually trying to solve for? And how might we get that data through different ways, in different ways that are consistent across everyone in the process? And so I think that's one of those other ways that we're oh, this is how we typically do. We need to see if they're going to be this on the leadership team. We're okay, so cool. But if as we look at the process, you're you just took 5 people through that process and they had 5 different experiences. And so what do you make of that? It's you've got 5 different kinds of fruit and maybe a truck. So so I think that's one of the things where it's it actually takes some pressure off the committee to figure out what to do with it when all right, this is why we ask this question. It's tied specifically to this thing and this is what we think we will get from that, based off of how people like similarly answer this question who have done this role before. And so it ties it together neatly, but it also back to those lines that Katrina showed earlier. It's a long line in that, because there's so much work that goes in this. It's not what questions did we use last time, or what questions, hey Katrina, did you use when you hired your director of marketing at X organization.
So it sounds like, there are some constraints that we're putting in this around no freelancing or highly structured, right? And I think, like, if you think about, if we reframe to, these are kind of creative constraints, right? In interviews, for example, there's a lot of ways to do this in super engaging kind of style. There are, ways to bring liberating structure process into interviews in ways you've probably never experienced before. There are different ways to set up questions, or to set up exercises than maybe you're used to, or and this is where there's some fun in design, there's some fun in that co-creation space, and there's some cues that we'll pick up from candidates and from the committee that we'll then be able to bring in to the next interviews to say, like, oh, something like this worked really well. For example, we want to see how this person is in a more relaxed environment. We know 5 people in a panel can be pretty stressful for people. And so what does it look like if we tag on 20 minutes as like a one-on-one, or a chance for the candidate to speak to somebody in a smaller, more intimate setting, and then go into a group, or to have a little bit of a debrief with somebody following an interview. So those aren't things we'll necessarily do, but they are likely things we'll talk about depending on how the process evolves, and how we are looking to learn from the candidates, and thinking about power, and thinking about the experience and the candidate care and all of those pieces. So Tim and I have some great examples of ways that we've done this that, others might say, like, oh, that sounds unusual. And we can say, the candidates responded so well to this, or the committee felt really at ease because we chose to do a process like this, or a question framed in this way. This is actually probably one of my favorite parts of the process.
Oh my God, it is. It's like there are a few things that I have done in my career that are more fun than trying to figure this out. And I think this is where, like, it is a lot of work, but it's like, it's different work. Like, it's fun, it's creative, it's intellectually stimulating. You're trying to solve a problem. You're doing it as a group. I think there are a few things that I think can be as much fun and fundamentally shift an organization as this. And I think that's why. And so, yeah, I think your point to, like, not to scare people off because of the time commitment, but like, it is a time commitment. And also, this is probably going to be some of the most fun stuff you get to work on, individually and as a group. And just to reimagine this part of the process that can change an organization, is what's so exciting and awesome about this part of, or just in general, but also like this part is like, it's where it gets, in your words, really juicy.